All right. How was your week and weekend? Well, how like you said, I haven't seen you for the last couple weeks. Things been really busy.
Yeah, things been busy. We were traveling for a little bit. We were in Spokane uh, last week, and then the week before was something else. I can't even remember now. But yeah, but it's been better. We're getting back to the normal timeline of everything. Um, so yeah.
I grew up in Southeast Washington in the Tri-City area,
Oh, okay.
Tri-Cities area in Richland, and we would go. My dad taught at several of the University of Washington extensions, and he would see other professors and stuff. So we would go to Pullman and Spokane quite a bit growing up. And I
Oh,
remember when I was younger, the drive from Richland to Spokane was one of my favorites because it was exciting to see more and more trees. Because you go from Oregon into Washington along the Columbia River right by Umatilla. There's a big sign that says "Welcome to Washington, the Evergreen State," and the only tree you see for miles is the one that's on the sign.
Mhm. Yeah, it was my first time in Spokane too because that's where my wife's grandparents is from. So that's why we were out there. I grew up in Anaheim, California. So it was my first time in Spokane too. It was a lot of trees and very foggy and wet.
Yeah, it's really nice up there. World War II, the 555th Paratrooper Squadron. It was an all Black American unit, paratrooper unit. The generals at the time would not allow them to jump into Europe because they felt that people of color could not handle the weapons they should have been issued. And so they were actually stationed at the Hanford area in southeast Washington. And while the Japanese were sending up high altitude fire bombs, which nobody knows about this part of history, but the Japanese knew about Hanford, and they knew that they were trying to create um, purified plutonium and uranium for the bombs. They were sending fire bombs into around Spokane and Boise and just that whole area there. And so those guys, they didn't fight in Europe, but they were on fire calls. They were out two, three times a week at least, fighting the fires.
Oh wow.
Huge, huge Captain America type heroes that nobody even knows about. But my grandpa was racist and he worked at the Hanford site. Meeting these men of the 555th completely changed his worldview. And my
Wow.
mom grew up seeing them as the model. You know, that was what a real man was like. So very different than typical World War II story. So yeah, I love that whole area. There's a lot of history there that we just don't know about.
Yeah.
But
It's
my sister, who is Shoshone, uh, she has family in Idaho, near that area where Spokane is. So just across the border. So that kind of cool. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the class today, but it's kind of fun to talk to somebody who has interesting stories to tell anyway. Um,
yeah.
I wanted, I would, if there's anything that you'd like to talk about, that'd be great to hear because that would kind of direct our conversation. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the research paper that people were working on. Um,
Hmm.
Share some comments that people have made about the service learning, and then also talk about the volumetric design with the wire and photography. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. If that's
Yeah.
is that good for you?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking at our class schedule right now. Look like the next sculpture is the biomorphic abstraction. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I want to hint at that a little bit too. I think that'd be really good. And then uh, talk more in depth about it next week. Um, One of the things that I think is difficult for some people to work with is the fact, since this is an online class, a
Hmm.
lot of the times in a regular class, you'd be working on your stuff while we'd be meeting, and we can't do that in this class. And so that's why I depend on people submitting their projects and then resubmitting when they need to, because
Hmm.
it gives us an opportunity to talk about it, and then if you need to, you can redirect your efforts a little bit.
Okay.
So
Yeah. For the wire sculpture, I made the fish. I don't know if you saw it. The shark sculpture.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, we talked about it a little bit last week.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to, let's see, I'm trying to get to a specific spot. What I'm seeing with, so a couple things I'm going to just cover really, really quickly, but a couple things that I'm seeing with the um, artist research, annotated bibliographies. What I'm liking is people are doing a pretty good job with the annotations. That is very, very good to see. Um, and I'm going to share, I'm going to pick on one that was turned in, and I'm just going to use this as a model to reference. And then we'll go on, we'll talk a little bit about the wire, and then we will talk more about the biomorphic abstraction as well. And I
Okay.
think that's a really good conversation to have with the quiz next week as well, as we talk about that too.
Okay.
Let's see. All right, here, sharing screen. Okay. This is what I'm seeing as the people are turning in. This is a pretty good example with the annotated bibliography. And we have what I'm really appreciating is we have these two paragraphs. One is kind of a summary of what the thing was that they're referencing, and then the second paragraph is kind of a reflection about it. This person talks about why this source is valuable, and some of them are biographical, some of them deal directly with the art, but I think that this person did a really good job, and this is pretty much a standard example of what people are doing. Did a pretty good job of doing really well written paragraphs. One that focuses on, like I said, on summary, and then the second paragraph focusing on a reflection. But this person does something that a lot of people are doing, and I don't want anybody to feel that I'm calling them out or anything. It's just this is what people are doing, and they're not reading the entire set of directions for the assignment or listening when I talk about how to do this. Um, First, this whole thing needs to be an MLA format, and most people are doing that pretty well. You do not necessarily need the URL. That's not necessary if you have everything else. That's fine. It's okay. But there's two things that people are continuously missing, and it just um, you'll miss some points, and then you can just fix it and resubmit after you edit. One is what's missing right here that I keep talking about.
Is it the author's name or?
Well, we got the author's name. Everything
Oh,
else is good.
yeah.
What we're missing is, remember I talked about Richard Hoagland last week, um,
Mm,
and his research into the NASA, the online NASA photographs. What we're missing is the accessed on date phrase right here. We've got to have that every time you do research that involves the internet on any level. At the end of your citation, put in accessed on and then the date that you encountered the information. Do you remember why that's important? Oh, Brittany, Polly, and Aaron joined us. Excellent. Very good. Do any of you guys remember why it's so important to have that accessed on phrase? Because the internet changes. It changes constantly. People can update sites. People can uh, somebody may hire a new internet person who will change their user experience to make it more uh, what's it called, ergonomic or whatever. And I don't know, my experience, whenever somebody messes around with something I'm comfortable with, regardless of the degrees that they have, it always makes it worse. But the internet changes. So this particular URL may not connect with exactly the article, in 6 months or a couple years. So the access on date is really vital to have after each and every single citation, because you can use an archive or the Wayback Machine website. You can use any of those things to find what that website looked at, like what that URL looked like on the day that you first encountered it. That's why it's so important. And all it is a simple thing, accessed on and then the date. Whatever format you use the date, you can have uh, the day, month, and year. You can have just numbers with slashes. It doesn't matter. Make sure that you use the same format in all your citations, and make sure that you have that accessed on date phrase at the end of each citation. So after that last period, accessed on. And then the second thing that people are doing is they want to put these in the orders that make sense to them. And that's fine. But for this assignment, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is these have to be in alphabetical order. So found, the F in found comes before the W in Wednesday, and the word found would actually be up here before the Frankowski. So these need to be in alphabetical order. Does that make sense? I mean, these are little things, but they are usually enough to drop your grade to a B for this kind of thing. They're simple fixes. All you got to do is go through, uh, edit it so that it matches the parameters, and I will point that out, and then resubmit it. And if I don't get to it right away to regrade it, drop me an email and let me know. A few people have already done that, and I appreciate that. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, again, I'm not targeting this individual. That was just, they just provided a perfect example of an otherwise excellent annotated bibliography that just needed a couple tweaks. Now, I did also want to talk about, we do have some stellar examples of service learning. And again, for the service learning, what's necessary is going through the process of engaging with somebody in the community who could use your help. And it needs to be specifically your help as a professional artist or somebody with your unique skill set as an art student. And this could be a lot of different things, but it does need to be an organization with the community. I mentioned that. And if for those who are having a hard time finding somebody to work with, uh, UVU has an I can't remember what the website is. I believe it's included in the assignment, the first assignments about service learning. But they do have an office where a service learning office that deals specifically with helping students find local groups and organizations. Um, the people who do service learning, it's essentially you're telling me about the project, you come up with a plan for it, you document what you do, and you do the project. And a lot of service learning people say, well, it's just not the same amount of time as a research uh, paper. And the reality is, you go through enough headaches trying to connect with somebody, it ends up being the same amount of time. Both sets of projects, either service learning or research, end up taking about the same amount of time. Service learning, honestly, though, is just a bit more of a headache. Um, one of the students, he spent 4 months. Well, the semester's 4 months long. This young man spent 2.5 months connecting with people. At the last minute, they would bow out. They would ask him for something. He would design the project, tell them about it. They would bow out, and or sometimes just stop connecting with him altogether. And he asked me 3 weeks before the end of the semester, I'm about ready to give up. I don't want to do this anymore because nobody's responding. And we actually kind of powwowed about what kinds of things he could do in his local neighborhood. And he ended up finding a retired U.S. veteran who was living by himself, had no family around, backyard had gone to pot, and this young man organized the community, designed a sculptural chicken coop, and on a Saturday, 3 or 4 other people from the community just helped him to build it for this guy, and then other people showed up and cleaned up the backyard. And so it was a lot of the time for that project was used up just trying to find somebody to connect with, and at the end, he was able to. So, but it was the whole community got involved in that case. It was a sculptural chicken coop for one member of the community. But things like working with nonprofit organizations, there's on campus, there is the Asperger's Institute. I don't remember what it's called. They deal with Asperger's and autism, and it's on the north side of the great big parking lot that's just right next to the highway. Sorry, but that whole building was entirely funded by community members who wanted to work with UVU in helping with autism and related issues, and they are always looking for things that students could do. And again, this is not a project that involves setting up chairs. It's a project that involves finding something that only you can do, and then I'm sorry, Paulie's saying the mic doesn't work. Oh, I, I, I'm sorry, I don't have the information right in front of me, but if you just do a university, actually, let's see if we can do a search on campus right now. UVU. I can't remember exactly what it was called. Okay, so Melissa Nelson Center for Autism on campus. And I'll put the website into the chat. If I can. Let's see. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right, I put it into the chat, and then I want to also share my screen with you so you can see what it looks like. So this is it. This is Melissa Nelson Center for Autism, and they are right on campus. This is what the building looks like. It's absolutely beautiful. But standing in front of the building like this, on your left, if you stick your arm out towards your left, you're pointing right towards the highway. So this is on the north end of campus, and it's just right at that north edge of the major parking lot that shares space with the library and all those things. Do you guys have an idea of where this is? So if you're staring at the building and turn right, you follow that road, it winds up and then leads you back up and to in front of the traffic office and that high school that's in Orem there. But they are really good to work with. Um, that's where I actually found out that I was neurodiverse, which is a nice way of saying what my family calls um, kooky. There's a lot of other derogatory terms my family uses to describe me, but basically, when your brain works like a pachinko machine, that center they're able to to find out very fairly quickly. Anyway, so does that help? I get for the people that are thinking about the service learning, and that's something else. There's about four people that haven't declared yet which avenue they're going to be doing. And for those four people, you have several different assignments that are showing up both for service learning and artist research. As soon as you declare, and that's an assignment that was due, I think, first or second week. As soon as you declare which route you're going, then I will remove those other assignments from your roster, so you don't have to worry about them. Okay. I would like to, if it's okay with you guys, does anybody have any questions before we move on? All right. So we only have an hour left. It'll probably be one of the longest hours you will ever endure. Probably not. I mean, if you are waiting to go in for a phlebotomy test, then that's probably going to seem like a lot longer. Anyway, I wanted to share some of the wire forms that people have submitted. And again, when I say things about theirs, please don't take anything personal. Don't get upset. And because do you remember that story that I shared a couple weeks ago? Just because somebody poops on your head doesn't make them your enemy, and somebody just because somebody pulls you out doesn't make them your friend. Same kind of thing. I'm not saying anything that's intended to be hurtful. I'm just talking about how these things fit with the assignment. So here we go. So several people have shared what they've done, and I want to just talk about some of these things. Now, I really like how this person photographed this. I This is really nice, and the reason why I say this is because not every photograph is going to documenting the artwork is going to be really good. But I like the fact that several people have done that kind of white infinity screen behind them and done this kind of thing, and so I really appreciate that. This person made sure that the base is really stable, and they've done some really fascinating things with textural work with the wire. These curls and things like that. And from my perspective, what they did well is there is this three-dimensional quality to this form filling space. It does engage the volume, and which I really appreciate. The a lot of attention is based on the or is focused on the base, so this vertical line becomes uh, very functional, and it doing something to kind of play with that, bringing that volume out a little bit, maybe spiraling it, maybe scribbling the wires around it so it expands out a little bit, might be really kind of interesting. This is one that I think is a really solid example of creating something, energizing the volume around the figure or the form. There are some things that I really like about this. Like you can see they used a line right there. They used a line right here, looped the wire around, but it really developed I mean, we can really feel the body of this. And when they took a photo, the only problem I have is that the photo has this horizontal line going through that. I don't like that because it detracts from it. And so I would recommend this person take a photo in front of a sheet or something like that to get rid of that horizontal line. But when I like how they lit this with a it looks like a single source where you can see some of that volumetric line use going on. And I like how they did different things with the ears than they did with the body. They did a little bit different things with the eyes and the nose to give a little bit of structural, textural difference. What do you think? Can you guys see what I'm seeing in this as it engages the three dimensional form? If you guys can are in a position to use your camera, that'd be really great. I would appreciate it. Now this one I think is really a fascinating one as well. I, I like how the energy is put into this cup. It looks like it's a jellyfish, and it looks to me like the person hung it in front of a sheet, and I like that. There is a little bit of this line going on back there, but it's not nearly as marked of a line as that other one is. And it doesn't bother me as much. On something like this, if you can, stabilize the top of the sheet and pull that bottom towards you, put weights on it so that you get rid of the crease when you're photographing. But I like how this engages that volumetric uh, uh, activity with space right up here, and I like how the tendrils are kind of spiraled. You get a very different feel of the wire texture down here than you do up here, and I like how they've made kind of a ring around the umbrella or whatever to anchor these against to kind of give it that form. And I think that, and this is really an interesting image as well, where you see it from the top down. You can see some of those spiral things. This one I think is really interesting and engaging. There, the things that I like about this are it looks to me like it's a giraffe. Um, and I like how the neck is made up with this kind of slinky spiral of wire, and the body is kind of like that too, except you also have these horizontal lengthwise wires that kind of give it a little bit more strength and stability. I like how the wire does some interesting things up here in the head, and then I like how the black wire is used to stabilize the legs, and then silver wire is attached to make this visually a bit more interesting. And I think that the silver wire on that to kind of flesh out the legs, flesh out the feet or hooves, whatever, is a little bit more interesting than if they had just left it black. I find that that engages the volume of the space a little bit more. And I think it's really interesting having this difference of, or the in colors of wire, gauges of wire in these areas. I think that that's really rather interesting. What do you guys think about this?
I think it's looked great. I like the two different color wires for sure.
All right. Yeah, I think that just makes it a little bit more fun to look at. And I think one of the things as an artist that's nice to do every once in a while is create something that people can just enjoy looking at. Now, this one, I really like this form right through here. I think it's really interesting. I like how they made it with the dark wire and then they again, like the previous one, they added a little bit of thinner wire that's a little bit different color. That's very interesting to me. One thing I did warn people about was creating floral forms because the tendency is just like with this to create something that only reads as a flower from a single perspective. It doesn't really engage uh, space very well, or other than you have the stem and then you have at right angles to it a flower form. If you are going to do a flower, what I would recommend is do something that's the flower is naturally volumetric. Don't do like a daisy or a pansy or a violet. Do something like an orchid or an iris, where the blossom itself has a volume. I'm sorry, orchids are not flowers, completely different. They look like flowers, they're confused with flowers, but having been married to a person that was an orchid grower, um, they get their noses bent out of shape if you talk about them as flowers. So forget that. But doing a blossom like structure like an orchid or an iris is a lot more interesting because those blossoms themselves have volumetric qualities. And so for this person, I would recommend looking at something uh, like mums have volumetric blossoms. Uh, Something that is like gladiolus might be really interesting. Um, Different things like that, or even using the wire to do some interesting things with the petals. But because petals are by their nature really flat, picking a flower that has the petals going all over, in many different directions, looks really interesting. Doing something like a blossoming rose has a volumetric petal structure. Um, Sunflowers maybe not so good, but because they're usually the petals are flat, engaged in on a plane. But like mums might be more interesting. Do you guys see what I'm talking about in that aspect? Okay. This I think is really interesting. Um, because one thing that I like about it is you have wires like this generating the basic structure of where the head and neck are going to be. Then you have wires looping around it, so you get this contrast of textures. Same kind of thing going on here. You have a stabilizing vertical wire with loops around it for the legs. And then this person also did different textures with the wire to get different areas of texture in the shell, which I think is really fascinating. This kind of loop does remind me of when we draw like elephant feet, you have their toes like that, which reminds me of a joke. You guys want me to share a joke with you? It is a total dad joke, and I don't know if you guys are ready for it. Would you like me to share it anyway? Okay. Why do elephants paint their toenails red? So they can hide in raspberry bushes. Now, when I heard that, I thought, Dad, that is the dumbest thing ever. And he said, Well, have you ever seen an elephant in a raspberry bush? Well, the answer, of course, is no. So evidently it works. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that. All right, and then here we have a shark. This is something else that I really appreciate this. This is a relatively simple one done with the wire. You can see this. It looks like there are two outlines, one that is horizontal, one is that is vertical. They are attached together right here, and then you have a little bit of this cross sectioning going on to build up the volume a bit. I like how we have a little bit of detail right here to make this tail structure a little bit different. What would be cool to see on this is going back with that, if this person found lighter wire like we saw on the giraffe and that vase, it would be really interesting to do horizontal loops to kind of build up and flesh out that texture a bit. Because this reminds me a little bit of what Jaime Plensa did with his building up volume and then adding shape to it so we could see the shadows be generated by overlapping wire. It would be kind of fun to see something like that going on with this one, or a little bit of lacing of wire right there to kind of build up the tail a bit. That would be really, I think, very, very fascinating to do. And I like the fact that this person took photos from two different angles because well, most people did, but I appreciate it looks very different from these two different angles. You get a little bit more of a sense of the texture and the layout. I really enjoyed this one too. One of the ones that I showed you guys was of a that teddy bear, and this kind of reminds me of that because we've got the legs. They remind me quite a bit of Alexander Calder. You know, the um, portraits that he did. You kind of see that a little bit in the face on the legs. I like how the tail has that central line and then curls around it. We have loops for the body, and we have these stabilizing forms going through here. The head has an overall loop to kind of structure everything else around, and then these little bits come out here and there. I think this one is really very fascinating, very fun, and it really does feel like a three-dimensional scribble. What do you guys think about this one?
I feel like your comment that it looks like a scribble is pretty spot on. I feel like I could really see this as a 2D like scribble. Like to me, it really does look like a sculpture of exactly what I'd expect their drawing to have been.
Yeah, I think so. It reminds me of the early James Thurber scribble drawings. But yeah, it's obviously 3D, but it does very much look like a scribble in dimensional space. That's kind of, and there's a bit of humor to it too. I think this one, I'm liking where this one is going. This, you know, we look at this, we look at that other one that was almost like a bird cage on a stand. What I liked about this person, these flowers are very simple flowers that have petals on a plane. But the person approached this more like looking at their rhododendron. Oh, and by the way, Aaron, did I say anything um, complimentary about your comment? Because I thought it was a really good comment. Sorry, my brain. One thing that I do that other people get really irritated by is what you hear is usually about 10 to 20% of the conversation I'm having with you inside my head. So I think we're talking back and forth, and I forget that you guys don't hear what I've been saying to you inside my head. But there are a couple things I really like about this is rhododendrons have very flat blossoms, but the blossoms are come together from a central joint, and they come out in all directions. So it ends up looking like, you know, healthy ones are about the size of volleyballs. It looks like a big ball of flowers. And this person has done something like that that I think is really intriguing. And I like how the base, it's not just flat, it's not just eminently practical. It has these little floral things, these shapes coming out too. The only thing that I think would be really interesting at this is adding a little bit more to the stem so it feels a little bit more volumetric. But I think this thing turned out really well. You know, if you're doing a flower type thing, this is a good route to go because again, even though the flower petals are flat, they did several all emanating from the center right there. And I think that's really very interesting. I like this one. Sometimes it's really difficult to do mechanical stuff, but you saw that AT-AT walker. I think that's from the moon of Endor from The Empire Strikes Back. And this I think is really interesting because that person, they've engaged us with the overall shape, you know, trying to outline where all the edges are, making those implied lines that exist, making those implied lines real. And I think that this one is really interesting. Um, what I would it would be kind of cool to see more wire coiled around these three lines that make that lens. That would be really fascinating. And but I think overall, I think this ended up this turned out pretty cool. You know, for and it does remind me of that AT-AT walker. This one I find particularly fun because, like that cat, it also feels like a scribble. And this person has done a lot of things, channeling Alexander Calder, um, so that it's stable, but they've played with texture. So you get these different textural lines. It has that overall kind of three-dimensional scribble quality. There are elements of it that you're pretty sure that this is going to be like a hat or something like that. And there are some elements of it where you see it really good from profile, and then from the other side, you also see it, which I think is fascinating. So this area right here is this area in a frontal view. So even though it looks like it would be a rather dull line if we saw it from the other direction, they were paying attention to that when they did it. And I think that this is really a fascinating one. What do you guys think about this one? Polly, I hope that um, emoji or whatever that you just did was a positive one. I don't I don't understand emojis very much, but I'm going to pretend that it's positive because I agree. It is a really interesting and engaging uh, three-dimensional scribble. Now, this one I think is really interesting. There's a lot of possibility to this one. Um, I like the stem structure, but for this one, I think this person would be really well served in creating more blossoms or working with the blossoms that are more volumetric. Like I mentioned, like iris or um, orchid or mum, that kind of a thing. I think, or doing, if they want to stick with this blossom, make a whole bunch of them so that the space is filled up with several different blossoms instead of just two. And I really like what that other person did, dressing the base so that it had all these curly cues and things growing up. It almost looked like leaves at the base or grass growing at the base. That this one might benefit from that as well. I think that that might be a really interesting direction to go take that. Looking at those and talking about them, does that help with everybody dealing with the wire? And if you want to go back and rework any of the projects, you can do that at any time. And if I don't grade it right away, just email me and say, hey, I redid this. Because even though Canvas does not let me know readily when somebody adds to a comment, uh, and so if you have added to comments and I haven't changed your grade, email me directly. Um, I say that every semester. There's always 3 or 4 people who get frustrated because I'm not responding to the comments in the actual assignments. I don't see those, so that's why you need to email me directly. But I am more than happy to push your grade up higher when you've gone back and responded to the comments that I've made and revisited the assignment. So the grades are not set in stone. All right. You know, I do want to talk a little bit about. Oh, the next one is um, the structure with skin, and okay, these dates that I have down, I changed everything about 2 weeks ago, so that things are more spread out. This does not look right to me. The next thing due should be structure with a skin, and we're talking about getting all that done in about 2 weeks from now. And then after that is a carved biomorphic abstraction, and that should be done towards the end of March. And right now it looks like those things are all due at the same time, and that should not be the case. So hopefully, before people really stress about these, look at or watch this all the way through so you know that these dates are not right. And I will, after tonight's call, I will try to change those. Long brought that up to me, and I didn't really understand what he was saying about it, and now I do. So this introduction structure with the skin, that's something that you should be reading this week. And the background and all those things that should be done this week, hopefully by Sunday. So I will change that right now. And then, and the artist review, and then the actual sculpture and everything should be due next weekend. And then I want you to go on to carved biomorphic abstraction. I don't understand why Canvas does this, and I will solidly place the blame on Canvas. But I put a new range of dates, and I move the assignments forward and everything like that, and it's supposed to automatically adjust that so everybody can see the updated dates for the new semester. And for whatever reason, that is not happening. But I thought I corrected it all. All the good dates were good for evidently for about an hour and a half 2 weeks ago, and they are not working now. So I'm going back through and I'm changing dates right now. So that it's more reflective of where I want you guys to be. And again, carved biomorphic, we're not even addressing that until, we're not even going to talk about that until a week or two from now. So let me get, if anybody can right now look and double check, you should be seeing that I am changing the dates on this. So I want to change this. Okay, there we go. And then after today, I will change the dates for the carved biomorphic abstraction. Or after we're done today. Is anybody accessing their Canvas right now? Can you guys see that I'm changing the dates on this thing?
Yes, it looked like everything is due on the 9th, right?
No, the quiz and the writing are due on the 9th. The project is due on the 16th.
For structure of the skin.
Yeah, that's what it should be.
Oh, okay, there it is.
And it looks like somebody posted the wire work on structure with the skin. Let's see.
That was me. My bad.
Okay. All right, then let's see. Okay, and I'm just changing the last one right now. Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so what it should look like is when you look at the structure of the skin, it should be, that's something that you should be working on over the next 2 weeks. So that's, all right. Yeah, I think I've got that all fixed. And again, module 4, I will change that for everybody so that it's updated as well, because that should be due at the end of March. I mean, at the end of February, excuse me. That should not be due right away. Okay. Okay, so let me go through this structure with the skin with you and talk about it. A couple people have said, "Well, I don't know if there's enough stuff in the kit." The kit is there to really help you. A lot of that stuff you are going to use almost all of it, but I want everybody to be completely comfortable with the idea that you can add to that. You don't have to limit yourself to what you see in the kit. And we'll go over this again next week as well. As you look at these things, this is what the idea is behind this. When you see a lot of sculptures, the undergirding, the armature is stuff that you never see. The armature is the thing that you use that is kind of like the skeleton of a sculpture that supports something that is not going to be able to be strong enough to support its own weight. So you see that a lot of the time with clay work or plaster work, things like that, where it's not going to be strong enough to support its own weight. And this is a really good example of how an armature works, in particular with the Statue of Liberty. This was designed by the same guy who did the Eiffel Tower. And you can see a lot of that. If we blow that up, you can see that same kind of square with the diagonal cross braces was used in the undergirding design of the Statue of Liberty. And what we see is just these sheets of copper that are molded to make the robes and the form of the individual. What we don't see is that copper is flexible enough that at its own weight, and in larger structures, it can't support its own weight. It doesn't keep an edge. It will bend over time if the structure is large enough. And so that's why, especially if you watch Ghostbusters 2, you see them spraying the happy goo all the way around the inside of the Statue of Liberty, and you can see a lot of that undergirding structure. If anybody wants to watch that movie and then share what they learned about the structure with skin next week, I'm sure we can find a way to give you extra credit. But the Eiffel Tower, this is an interesting structure because the only thing you see is that undergirding, that armature. And then, of course, the only thing we see here is the covering. And with the structure and the skin, what we want to do is explore that idea that both of those things are important. And this has a lot of artists that will that work with both undergirding and skin, and they have different, and they place different uh, layers of importance on both of those things. And then you can kind of see how Richard Deacon, he creates these really amazing, impressive structures like this, where your brain starts filling in the gaps so you can almost see this as covered with the skin, which I think is really fascinating. Have you guys ever played with those like insect or dinosaur models where they're just flat pieces of wood and you put them together in different ways and then you can see the structure kind of develop through? Okay, Long, you have. Anybody else know what I'm talking about, what I'm referring to? And it comes in like a flat pack. You open it up and it has 8 to 10 sheets of really thin plywood. You snap the pieces out and then you interlock them in different directions and it generates a critter, basically, just with flat pieces. And that's what Richard Deacon's work reminds me of. Frank Gehry is really amazing at what he does. We're gonna Let's see. I want to watch this. It's an advertisement for Masterclass, but I think it's really important to watch this as he talks about his own artwork. So let's go ahead and watch this really quick. I do not get any sort of a kickback if you do decide to sign up for the Masterclass teaching thing. There are some interesting things there. We're just watching this because it gives us a chance to learn about him as how he thinks about architecture.
I have always felt If you know what you're going to do in advance, then you won't do it. Your creativity starts with whether you're curious or not. Roll them. Go. Action. When you build a building, any building, start with the simple block model to see where that goes. Most of our cities are built with just faceless glass, only for economies and not for humanities. As an artist, I got constraints. Gravity is one of them. But within all those constraints, I have 15% of freedom to make my art. I'm always trying to express movement. I was fascinated with the fold, so basic to our first feelings of love and warmth. These ideas are scary as hell to tell to the client. They can reject you, and they will, but you got to find your own voice. Create the logic for it as you go. Stretch it into another place. I'm just telling you how I did it and why I did it. Whatever you do, promise me that every project you make or design, you'll take the risk of doing something for humanity. I'm Frank Gehry, and this is my masterclass. You'd think I'd know when to quit.
What I like about that is looking at his work. We are so used and comfortable to seeing buildings that have a very block-like structure, and he's really paying attention to those ideas of making the skin take on a life of its own and speak for itself. And that's something that I really enjoy looking at. And Buckminster Fuller is another one that I really like looking at, because where Frank Gehry really concentrates on supporting the skin, Buckminster Fuller, um, he was an untrained geometer essentially, and he started inventing without having formal training. He created an incredibly fuel efficient car, a very safe or space efficient dwelling that was really inexpensive to build, and he created the geodesic dome. Are you guys familiar with the geodesic dome? It looks like that girding that we saw with the Eiffel Tower and underneath the Statue of Liberty, but it was specifically designed by Buckminster Fuller to, it is the only geometric structure on the planet that actually gets stronger the bigger it gets. Everything else you have to really worry about weight constraints, like Frank Gehry was talking about. But the geodesic dome that Buckminster Fuller invented gets actually stronger the larger it gets. So I think that's fascinating. Okay, we do have some time. I want to go through the quiz really fast. I wonder why. Okay. Oh. So we're going to go look at the preview on this. Some people have already been turning these things in, and even though a lot of this material is covered in the textbook, I did want to go through this. If you didn't get a perfect score, go ahead, go through, retake the quiz. On this, we're talking about delineated forms. And this is in Adam Thomas's Better Half / Opposites Attract. Has anybody gone to this section of the textbook? Do you know what delineated forms are? Another word, a synonym for delineated, is outline. And so the forms that are delineated are the forms that are outlined. And when we're talking in sculpture, a lot of these lines are going to be implicit. They're going to be implied. They're not going to be something that is drawn on by a magic marker. So on this, there are several delineated forms in this. And there's two primary ones that I want people to get to talk about when they take the quiz. One set is what's encompassed by these big circles of the curved ladder? What's encompassed? Well, it's the circle that's inside of those ladders. There isn't a drawn line, but the form of this circle in space is delineated by the ladder. Now, using that logic and extending it out, where is the other principal set of delineated forms in this sculpture?
Is it the rectangle that's made up in between the letters?
Yeah, absolutely. These rungs right here and the outside edges of the ladder, these are delineated forms, these rectangles, just like Long said. All right. Do you guys see that? Now, the rectangles on the ground, these are not so much because they actually are outlined, very, very physically outlined. So in this case, the delineated forms would be these circles. There's two of them, and then all of these rectangles. Excuse me. And rather than explaining to me what the delineated forms are, when you answer this question, describe what they are. Don't give me a definition. Tell me, yeah, it's these shapes right here and these shapes right here. All right. Now, two most common rigid material sculptors use in constructing artworks. What we are talking about specifically is the most common. So this is what artists have been working with through all time. And so right away, we can eliminate three of these answers. What are the three answers that we can eliminate when we're talking about most common, paying attention to art throughout history? Well, first off, we can eliminate everything that says plastic in it because plastic has only existed as an art medium for the last two generations. So we can get rid of first one and we can get rid of the last one. What else is something? Now, the other three materials have existed throughout a significant amount of Earth's history, but there is only one of these three materials that are listed in these two answers that has been revered by several different societies as a workable gemstone. Anybody want to guess what that is? Right here, glass. Glass is something that's been used for a long time, but it was expensive enough that most people didn't. So it's not a common and material, rigid material at all. So we can't use first one, we can't use the last one, and we definitely shouldn't be using this one. So anybody want to guess what answer is left? What was that, Aaron?
I was just making a pop culture reference to the correct answer.
Oh, okay. But
Sorry.
you guys, what's that?
Sorry.
No, that's totally fine. So the answer is, anybody want to guess what that last answer is? And I'm pointing at it right now.
Metal and wood.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. Gold star. Now, fiber arts, this is actually talked about in the textbook. And there are a number of different artists that will use this. I have another class that one of the assignments is you take string, soak it in glue, and then wrap balloons with it. And then after the glue dries, you can pop the balloon and you get this ball made out of hard string. And so what do you think the answer is for number 3?
Is it true?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when we talk about negative space is whatever is not there. And so when we look at this, I see a lot of planes and a lot of areas where negative space really are important to the overall feeling of this sculpture. Like right here, This is a reclining figure, and you have negative space right here and around the head that really helps the head to pop. You can see negative space underneath the arms, so we can tell what those are. Around the hip area makes this really interesting shape. Underneath the foot, which gives it a certain amount of tension. But do you see the negative space, since it's everywhere that the sculpture isn't? What would this sculpture look like if there wasn't any negative space to it? What shape would this be? Brittany or Polly, what shape would it be? I don't know. Are either of you able to respond? Well, if this didn't have the negative space here, it would all be filled up. So instead of negative space, this would just be a big white marshmallow. Oh, Brittany? Okay, that's fine. The question, Polly, is what shape would this be if there wasn't any negative space to it? And it would just be a big glob, because the negative space, that's what gives the sculpture its tension and form, is the negative space. And generally, we're sculpting with the positive form, but it's really good to be considerate of the negative space, because this, like in the particular setting, the negative space really makes it engage with the trees and the ground as well. Very interesting stuff. Have any of you guys worked with stage sets in community theater, anything like that? What's forced perspective?
Is a way that you set up a frame or an object where it would draw the person focus, or where their perspective would be going to.
Yeah, exactly. And like in stage sets, you use forced perspective because everybody responds to perspective as it is. Forced perspective is a way for us to just pretend that the volume is bigger. And in sculpture, there's a lot of different ways to apply what Long was talking about. And what it comes down to with sculpture is that the viewer engages with space differently through what the sculptor is doing. It's have you guys seen those rooms where it's all white and the person just does drawings with the black lines and stuff like that? It really screws around with your perspective, because you think of things in relationship to each other. You think of things being farther away of a slightly different color. All that stuff comes into effect. And when you see that when you're in that kind of a room, it really messes up with you, messes up with your head. This one, there is not a right answer, but you just need to articulate why you feel one of them reacts really well, engages really well with the volume of space around it. This one looks like it's about ready to fall over, makes me very uncomfortable. This one, a lot of people have pointed out that this one is socially engaging, the space around it, because it looks like it's wants to interact with you. And this, I think, is really interesting because it looks like it's moving. Even though it's a stationary object, it looks like it's in the throes of moving. I think it's fascinating. So all three of them are really good. And then there are several different reasons why wax as a material is often cast into something else. Um, each of us could come up with a different reason. So, Brittany, if you can't talk, do you want to try typing in one of the reasons? There are several different reasons. Yes, it wax reflects even the tiniest of details. You can put a feather into wax. So yeah, Polly and Brittany both excellent, very good. And Brittany says it's also destroyed easily. Wax is not very strong. It will fall apart and melt. Uh, that is one of the reasons why it was used so often with metalwork, because the wax, you can put a lot of detail into the wax. You cover it with clay, smush the clay in to get all those details, and then once you melt that out, you can fill in the volume with another material. And that's why it's called lost wax casting, because it was so easy to use. But it's not. It can't be a permanent material because the weather affects it. You put it outside for too long, especially in Utah, in the end of July, first part of August, there's not going to be anything left other than just a puddle of goo. Now, this material is one of the highest plasticity ratings. Plasticity is ease of use and reuse, ease of manipulation. Some of the things that have high plasticity ratings are like, I don't know if you guys ever used Play-Doh or Silly Putty. It moves and can change shape really easily over and over. That's what plasticity is. Plastic actually means malleable. That's another synonym for it. And when that material was discovered by using from petroleum products, it was just called plastic because they felt that they could do all sorts of things to change its shape. And we talked about armatures just a little bit ago. This is talked about quite a bit in the book, but it's basically that spine or that skeleton that's used underneath something that's more flexible or doesn't support its own weight. Are any of you guys familiar with the Jurassic Park movies? Have any of you heard the name Phil Tippett? He won an Academy Award for special effects. He's actually won a couple of them. Phil, are any of you old enough or obscure and interested in obscurity enough to have ever watched any of the old Sinbad movies? I'm particularly thinking of Sinbad and the Seven Seas, or the Seven Journeys of Sinbad. When people were trying to make monster movies way back in, it started in the 30s with stop motion animation. At the same time, people were making cell animation for like cartoons and things like that. People were also making stop motion animation. With 24 frames a second, if you can gradually move something through those 24 frames and take an image of each slight movement, when the eye sees 24 frames a second, it sees a continuous motion. Because that's how our eyes are, that's how fast our brain works to process imagery. And Phil Tippett created these armatures and flexible structures around the armatures for Jurassic Park because he was the world's best stop motion animator at the time. And if you guys have seen Paranorman, Kubo and the Two Strings, those kinds of movies, you guys are familiar with those at all? That's a style of stop motion animation. And Phil Tippett could make dinosaurs look like they were running in real life using his incredible skills of stop motion animation. And then the studios that was putting together the first Jurassic Park movie started realizing that digital animation got to the point where it looked photoreal. And so they actually had Phil Tippett come and help their animators construct animatronic things that only existed in a digital environment. And that's how they created the first Jurassic Park movie. And that's what all of that real world appearing animation, computer generated animation, that's what it's all based on, that kind of a thing. And the reason why that's important, or at least peripherally important to this subject, is that it's all based on a flexible structure built around an armature, because that armature is the thing that allows the animators to work with the thing, with the material for animation. If you guys haven't seen Kubo and the Two Strings, I highly recommend it. It is one of the best examples You agree? Okay, good, because it is one of the best examples of armature animation, stop motion animation ever. And still, I also like the scene with the narwhal in the movie Elf. That's really great example of classical stop motion animation. Anyway, and this is we're talking about scale, and this applies to this as well. I mean, we look at something like this. One of the reasons why this is so dynamic is like any of us would stand, our heads would be about right up to here, I believe. This thing is huge and it engages negative space in a huge volume that helps you to feel really engaged with it because of ideas of scale. And it's fascinating to me. We look at um, Slinkachu's tiny scale works. He talks about very serious things that are approachable because of the humor associated with the scale. You look at this, and Ron Mueck does work where ordinary things are made monumental because the scale is so gigantic. And it helps us to emotionally engage with the piece in a way that we most likely normally wouldn't. When I think it's fascinating. And what I love about Dwayne Hanson's stuff is his things are designed to be entirely realistic. And he will set things up in a museum or a gallery in such a way, or he used to, that people thought they were just actors that would stay still. And it's fascinating because you engage with the art very differently in each of these different uses of scale. I think that's so. This question gives you an opportunity to think about that and talk about it. And then this goes in full circle, comes back to the structure of skin um, idea, where we're creating something where both the structure and the skin are equally important. And on this one, you get two different views. One, you see the entire skin most primarily, and the other view, you really see the structure, the undergirding. And I ask the question, which is most important? The answer is both are most important. And you get to pick one and then articulate your defense of your choice. Using your language, your vocabulary from reading in the textbook and things. And we talked about putting on your big girl pants when it comes to vocabulary. I raised 5 daughters, so going through this class, applying those 4 tools of artistic critique, those are tools that are really going to be coming in handy as you justify your presence as an artist, as you talk about the work that you do. But also, it really helps us to engage these kinds of cognitive ideas. And I don't know if I've talked about this before. Are you guys familiar with how old the word blue is? Have you ever thought about that? The word blue in Western literature is only about 2,400 years old. How long do you think blue has existed as a color?
Way longer than that. I think is it like discovered during the Silk Road time?
Well, I would even argue that it's been around since the birth of the universe. It's a wavelength that we've already always seen, but it's interesting that it hasn't shown up in like Western literature until about 2,400 years ago. And you can see that it was used, like it's used in 4,000-year-old Indian paintings on lintels of buildings. It's used in really ancient work in China. It's used in some of these really old stuff, like in Egypt. Blue was used um, 3,500 years ago, at least. Ancient Babylon, the Macedonia area, that that whole region in the Middle East, they used lapis a lot because it was considered. They would put it in eyes to demonstrate a connection between the soul of the figure being represented and heavens, because lapis was considered a divine stone because it was the same hue as the evening sky. But what's interesting to me is when ancient Greeks were talking about the sea and the sky, they would talk about the bright sky or the wine dark sea. You look at the Homeric hymns and writings by Homer, and in the Homeric hymns. But it wasn't until about the third or fourth century, and even though the Etruscans were using blue in a lot of their work for 1,000 years earlier, it wasn't showing up in anybody's lexicon until about the third or fourth century BC, which I think is really fascinating. And then now, if you think about it, how many words do you think there are for blue? And not just in English, but in like the Latin-based languages. There's a lot of, there's a lot of words for it, which I think is really amazing. And when you look at something now, how many I think if everybody can see that icon on poly, how many different shades of blue are just on this icon, and we can articulate each one. We have turquoise, we have a dark navy almost, and we have kind of an earth tone, but we can describe different shades. And I think that having the vocabulary also helps us to see a lot of the different ones, a lot of the different shades. When we use our targeted vocabulary to be precise about our description, our analysis, things like that, I think it doesn't just help us to communicate what we're experiencing, but it also helps us to be more precise in our thinking about it too. And so when you are looking at these things, when you're writing answers and quizzes and things like that, when you're using the tools of artistic critique in the critiques that you give yourself or others, try really hard to be as precise as you can with the language that you use, because it helps you to be more precise in your thinking as well. And the idea of using these patterns for critique is not just to help in articulating what you're thinking about, but it also expands your thinking in the future as well, which I think is really an interesting byproduct. But now we don't have a lot of time because I rambled a little bit too much, but this is what the assignment is. Creating something with about a half dozen modules, and then putting those modules together. And this needs to be about the size of a volleyball or a basketball when you get all done with it, but making it so that both the structure that you see, that undergirding, that armature, is as important to the impact of the sculpture as the skin that you're applying. Structure, you can use any of the materials that you have in your kit. You have sticks, you have different things like that. You can use the skin, can be paper, it can be the cardstock that you see in your kit as well, or you can make your own stuff. I've had people take origami squares that they found in the back of a closet, and they coiled them up really, really tightly along the diagonal and made all these toothpick shaped things that were about that long, and use that as their armature, sticking those together. I've had people use the hot glue gun to make the armature. I've also had people use gum and wrap it with thread, for each of the joints, which I think is really a little gross, but oh man, I was at I go to Seattle quite a bit, and a couple of years ago, we were coming out of Pike's Place Market, and I turned around and I saw this little 2-year-old. His parents were talking to somebody else, and he walked over to the gum wall, the Seattle gum wall, pulled off a piece of gum, and it was horrifying. Time slowed way down, and as he put it into his mouth, and it was just ick. Anyway, but there's lots of different options for assembling this, and you guys, there's lots of different things that you can try and experiment with. The important thing is you make a module that's about the size of your fist. The module is basically a crate shaped box, and you can see the module is made with those 12 sticks assembled at right angles to make that kind of elongated cube. Here, the module is made up of several triangles. You can see there's a triangle here, there's a triangle here, and you have something holding it together there. And here, the module is made up of these trapezoid shapes that are put together. And two of the trapezoids at an angle at the narrow end make up each of the modules. And then the person applied the skin. On this case, the skin is a piece of cardboard, and sometimes it's offset, sometimes it's flush with the edges. Here, this person, all the modules are identical, and the skin is two pieces of paper applied to the outside, and then the modules are stuck together in a spiral shape and then reversed and spiraling the other way. On this, some of the skins are rectangle, some of them have notches cut out. Not all of the modules are identical, but they look like they belong to each other. And on here, the modules are a little bit more odd. They're not as structurally sound, but the person made a lot of them and turned it into this kind of organic snake. And the skin is applied here and there, sometimes in triangles, sometimes as a trapezoid. But what's interesting about all of these, sometimes the skin conceals, sometimes it's behind. Sometimes it's in front, sometimes it's behind. Same kind of thing. Sometimes it's like this, it's behind, and on this, it's in front. But what they're doing is they're using that difference between application of skin and armature, or skin and structure. They're changing it up so that as a viewer, it becomes interesting. We want to walk around it. We want to look at different angles, because here a portion of the view is occluded, and we need to want to walk around so we can see a little bit more clearly. But when we walk around, another piece of paper is in the way in a different area. So we need to keep walking around it. And that's the point of this exercise. Does that kind of starting to make sense with people? Because we'll talk about it more on Wednesday. And even if you don't get this done, it might be a good exercise to design a module and maybe post that in the discussion. And then we can look at these modules on Wednesday, and then talk about how maybe putting this together in a sculptural work. But I think those three student examples are really good examples of how to approach this. And definitely look at all of those artists. Look at what the different artists do in relationship to structure with skin. Watch all those videos, and then we'll have more to talk about when we get back together on Wednesday. Let's see, and I am. Before we separate for tonight, for the week, does anybody have any questions or anything else? Oh, who said no? What is that? I'm sorry. What is that in relation to? Because I was rambling on, and I totally. Oh no, eating the gum off the wall. Yes. Oh, it's something that still makes me feel nauseated right through my hips and up my spine. It is, that was so disgusting. And watching it as the parents realized why the kid suddenly had gum, it was, those high intensity action movies where everything narrows down to a simple moment, and the voices are really stretched out, and they're moving really, really slow because the camera slows. It was just like that, like something out of the Matrix, or it was horrible. But yeah, that's a memory that I always will treasure. Going to Seattle, Pike's Place Market, good times. Oh man, I hope nobody's eaten recently. So disgusting. Yeah, everybody's going to be having nightmares tonight. Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you. Any final questions or observations about stuff today? Again, Do not worry about the carved biomorphic abstraction. We will talk about, I will reset those dates. The thing we need to worry about right now is structure with the skin. Okay. And I would highly recommend just work on your module and post your module on the discussion board, and then we'll go through and look at that. Does that sound like a good plan for everybody? Polly, it's next weekend. So this coming weekend, that's when your quiz and your essays due, and then next weekend is when the structure with skin is due. All right? Is everybody good with that? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And the folks who don't watch this all the way to the end will miss the bits where I say, don't do the carving yet. And so I hope everybody does watch this and get their attendance points. Hey, thank you guys. I really am so grateful when several people show up. It makes it so much easier because then I'm playing to an audience and we can engage with questions that people have that are actual questions that are needed to be answered. When nobody shows up, not only do I cry a little inside, but it makes it so that the episodic nature of our course is much, much, much more boring. So thank you, folks. I hope you guys have a wonderful week and weekend. I look forward to seeing what you guys are coming up with. So far, I'm really happy with what I'm seeing with the wire. If you didn't get all your points and you look at what I've written, if you feel a need to defend yourself or you think I've gotten it wrong or I wasn't properly grading it, please let me know. Or if you need clarification, talk to me about that too. All right? All right, guys. We will see you next week. Be safe, be well, and don't eat any gum that somebody else has chewed.
Thank you.